You've got my picture in there, Jeff.
What?
My picture's in there.
Do you want your picture in there?
No, because when I look at it, my real face goes over the.
Okay, well, how do you know how to get rid of it? You just
Tell
go,
me.
um, you don't join it. You bring it, you join it.
Yeah, well, I'm there.
Hold on a minute. Oh, you're there.
Yeah, I'm always there. You're.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And we didn't know what to expect, even when we planned this event, which was quite a while ago. We didn't know. Well, Elayne is not a nationally known figure, and Elayne, her husband David, are still relatively new to our congregation, so we weren't sure what how much of an appeal this program would have. I think we're really happy with this turnout, especially given the the very you know heartbreaking, disturbing. Uh, I mean, those words don't even begin to capture what I think we're all feeling about what happened in Israel last Saturday and what is now an ongoing crisis. So, we sort of checked in with each other about whether we should even cancel or not. And Elayne asked me that, and I said, no, let's do it. We're not going to put all of Jewish life on hold indefinitely. And in fact, I think a lot of people feel that it's very important to keep to keep going, to continue to live and function and build our Jewish lives, even in the face of this tragedy and this devastating event that happened last weekend. So. Again, welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. I've already said a little bit. Our guest, Elayne Klasson, is actually not a guest. She's part of the family. She and David are members of our congregation, although they live up in the Santa Ynez Valley, so it is a bit of a schlep for them to come over the hills to be here. Elayne, this is not Elayne's first book. The book that we're going to be talking about tonight, The Earthquake Child, is it your second book, Elayne? Yeah. Yeah, I've written. So I'm interested in all of them. This is the only one that I read this book after we planned this program, and I just found it compelling. I read it almost straight through. I cried, and it really moved me. So I just want to begin by giving my own personal strong endorsement of this book. Elayne's the other book that she's had published is called "Love is a Rebellious Bird," and it was a National Jewish Book Award runner-up. National Jewish Book Award is as good as it gets in the Jewish book world. Is that a fair statement, Paul? Paul Zakshofsky is our program director, and he knows the Jewish book world much better than I do, but I know that if a book wins the National Jewish Book Award or is a runner-up or is even nominated, it's pretty much guaranteed to be an amazing book. The fact that Elayne's other book, the Love is a Rebellious Bird, was a runner-up is just a tremendous accomplishment, and congratulations. And that book and this book are for sale immediately afterwards, and Elayne will be happy to sign them for you. So I encourage you to buy one or both. So with that, one of the things that I about, because I don't do these things regularly. It's not, part of what I'm used to as a rabbi. But I said, Elayne, how are we going to talk about your book without spoiling the plot? The plot is so, you want to find out what's going to happen. And she said, you're right. We can't spoil the plot. So we're not going to talk so much about the story of the book itself, but rather I'm going to ask Elayne to share a little bit. First of all, to read a little bit from the book. Tell us a little bit about the book, her process, and so on, and then we'll take it from there. So, Elayne.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's a real thrill to have the endorsement of a rabbi I so respect. And no, that's the truth. We moved here from the northern part of the state 6 years ago, and I feel like I found my Rebbe. And it really meant a lot to me that he read it, not just out of duty, but that he enjoyed it. And I also want to thank you for coming tonight. Our hearts are really bound up right now. I cannot tear myself away from the TV, even though I know it's not healthy. I try to not be obsessed, but I just keep watching too, as I know all of you are. It doesn't get any better. There is a theme, however, because in the book I talk a lot about grief and loss in the context of adoption. and in the context of what an adopted child may feel. And there is some grief because of some loss that happens in the families. And I feel that the subject of grief is very much with us right now. So I think there is some continuity with the book, at least I hope so.
Definitely.
And I'm going to read you, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the book first. There's an article that I have here from New Yorker, if anyone is particularly interested in the subject of adult adoptees. Do we have any adult adoptees here tonight that are willing to raise their hand? And are there any people who've adopted a child? Okay, thank you. We have a very and I won't ask this question unless somebody wants to share afterwards if anybody has relinquished a child. Because these are the three players in the adoption triangle, and they're the three players that I wanted to write about. I didn't want to write about just the adoptee or just the adoptive mom, adoptive family, or just the family that has relinquished a baby, because I wanted there to be no villains and no heroes. I wanted us to have compassion for everyone involved in the adoption triangle. And I was hoping that as an informed audience, which you actually all are, that you'll have, that this will resonate with you on some level if you've been part of the adoption triangle. But I also hope it will resonate with families, and I'll talk about this in a sec, who have children and who have observed that our children are all different, that we can't even figure out why this is, and how children that have come from the womb and perhaps the same dad can be so different about that. Because I think when I want a book about nature and nurture, I wanted specifically to address adoption because it means a lot to me as a subject. But I also wanted us to begin to contemplate and try to figure out those mysteries of why our children are all so different from each other. So the book is fairly new, The Earthquake Child, so I thank you for coming. I feel like a lot of authors say this, but it's so true that it's birthing another child to the world. It takes a long time to write a book, and it takes a long time to publish a book, and it takes a long time, the editing process and so on. So it's very much like having a very long pregnancy. So thank you all for coming and for helping me as the book gets birthed into the world. It's only 3 months old. And I actually have to quickly thank my husband, David Wong, who's incredibly supportive to me in my dream of becoming a published author, and who schleps the boxes or, schleps the square to pay, and, he's just there, and that's I'm very grateful for that. And I have a lot of friends who are kind of like my posse. None of them are here, but I've thanked them at events up in Bay Area, because I had a posse. I had 5, and it sometimes would evolve to 10 friends who were all good readers, who would come to my house once a month and sit in my living room and let me read a chapter to them. And this posse of women who were mostly women, there was a couple of men who were pretty literary, they were so invaluable to just sit and listen to me read. Because I wasn't looking for editing per se. I was looking, I know we have some editors here. I wasn't looking for editing per se, but I was looking for just, where do I get a laugh? Where do I get a tear? Where do I get, people hunched forward? Where does it look like people are falling asleep? I mean, that stuff you can only get from reading out loud. So I was so grateful to them. So actually, The Earthquake Child was conceived 15 years ago, and I wanted to share my thoughts about and experiences with adoption. And I wanted also for people here and everyone who read it to wonder and think about why each of our children are so different and alike, and how each of your kids, if you have more than one, is so different from the others. More than just the complicated patterns of DNA. I mean, there's a new theory of inherited trauma, and my God, we know that's going to happen in Israel, that there is trauma passed on through generations, and certainly that was true of Holocaust survivors. But I really thought there was there's more and more medical research on the idea of inherited trauma. We don't really know, though. Why does one like mayonnaise and one gags at the sight of mayonnaise? More importantly, why do some of our kids just kind of float through the world gracefully, and they're easy in their own skin, and they're confident? I used to say it's kind of their core is very strong, and other of our kids, we don't know why. They feel criticized if you look at them funny, if whatever you say, they get pissed off at, and we never even intended to hurt them. So I had a child that I adopted right after he was born, I mean within hours of his birth. And I also had children from 2 different dads. So I know from what I talk about this differences. I was divorced very young in life, and I had 2 kids, and then I was married again to a wonderful man who died rather young. And so I had another kid, and then the 4th child I adopted. So I had the experience of bio children and adopted children, and that was the real motivation for writing it. However, I didn't get it published. I didn't quite have it finished, and then I started in my frustration because I'm sure most of you are aware that you can submit and submit and submit. I had I had many submissions. I was going to talk about J.K. Rowling, the author, of course, of Harry Potter series. She had 75 submissions before she found an agent who would look. I had many rejections. I papered my room with rejections. Finally, I got Love is a Rebellious Bird published. And it was about why we love the people we do. And it's not a story of a marriage, it's a story of a 60-year relationship where a very powerful man, where the power equation between the man and the woman are not equal. And they go through life and they come in and out of each other's lives. Now, I expected this book, my first published novel, to drop into a deep, dark hole, because so many books do, but I was ecstatically surprised to read that it was read by a pretty big number of people, and it was even on the Southern California bestseller list for a week. And that was pretty exciting, and it allowed me to discuss why we love the people we do, to talk about those relationships, why we choose to love people, why people choose to love us. And it's a line from the opera of Carmen where she says, love is a rebellious bird. This bird, it can come towards you and love you and you don't want it. But on the other hand, looking out there at a bird that you do adore and it has no interest in you. So I thought Carmen really said it well in the opera. And I got to discuss this topic of why we love who we love at book groups, even at the Skirball Museum, and at various community functions and in big bookstores. And to have people, this was my dream come true, folks, when I wanted to become a fiction writer, to have people actually sit and seriously discuss my characters. I mean, I don't have the right or the wrong. If somebody interprets a character, they interpret them. I'm not going to say, oh, no, that's not right. But just to have them seriously sit down and talk about my characters that I had created was unbelievable. So then Love is a Rebellious Bird, as I said, did pretty well, and I actually had the confidence that I could get Earthquake Child published. So I went back, tightened it up, cleaned it up. It was, probably many years been sitting, and it was my husband who said, what are you going to do? Let it sit in your desk drawer or on your hard drive for the rest of your life? So he really pushed me to keep applying and submitting. It finally, as I said, the new book had publication June 30th. It was edited and sweated over, and I submitted the book for beta readers to a lot of people who were adoptive parents themselves, because I wanted to make sure that I was not getting any facts too mixed up. Although adoptive stories, every one of you who has adopted a child knows that every story is individual. What I did was I just sat down. This is kind of the way I write in general, which is I just created little vignettes, little stories about the child, the birth mother, and the adoptive mother, and then put it together. And I created the picture in this book of one adoptive child, and it's not all adopted kids, and it's not all families. I wanted to quote the epigraph at the beginning of the book. The little epigraph at the beginning is by a really wonderful writer called A.M. Holmes, and she sums up what I believe. Quote, "To be adopted is to be amputated and sewn back together. Whether or not you regain full function, there will always be scar tissue." So I'm going to read a small section. The book varies in chapters, so one chapter is about Joshua, the boy, and one chapter is about Eleanor, the birth mother, and another chapter might be about Kelly, the birth mother is Kelly, I got that was switched, or about the adoptive mother named Eleanor. And I'll start with earthquake, which, are any of you earthquake experienced from Northern California too? Okay, right. So the earthquake, 1989. The earthquake hit shortly after 5 o'clock on the afternoon of October 17th. When the trembling began, Eleanor was alone in the house, standing in front of a mirror in the upstairs bathroom. The weather in Los Altos had been still and warm all day, a bit of humidity in the air, unusual for Northern California in October. In the years to come, she called this earthquake weather. The papers reported that the Loma Prieta earthquake was a violent collision of tectonic plates in a previously ignored section of the asphalt. Located 50 miles to the south of San Francisco, it measured 7.1 on the Richter scale, lasting a mere 15 seconds. However, time did strange things during those 15 seconds, expanding and undulating. And during that brief time, Eleanor had a powerful and surprising thought. Even in the midst of her terror, Eleanor Russell realized how much she wanted another child. As the shaking continued, Eleanor feared that the whole house would come down, its wood beams and plaster walls collapsing on her. She feared she would be buried under the rubble with no one arriving in time to find her, and she felt the frail flesh and blood humanness of her own body. For the first time, she thought she might be facing death. On that Tuesday afternoon, she put her hands to her belly and felt a longing that she could never adequately explain afterwards. That she had 2 teenage children. They were from her first marriage, another lifetime. She wanted a baby, one that was hers and Ron's. She thought she had made peace with the urge for another child, but it was jostled loose by the shaking of the earth. We'll skip a little bit here. The school board meeting that she was preparing for never took place. With eyeliner applicator poised in midair, she heard the first deep rumbling. It sounded as if a heavy truck were passing their house. But Eleanor and Ron lived in the hills where there was no truck traffic. The rumbling was immediately followed by a huge rocking. The entire house swayed from side to side. From the upstairs bathroom, she heard the joints twist and moan, a sickening sound. As she gazed into the mirror, she saw with horror that the heavy pine armoire directly behind where she stood was tilting forward, heading for her. She stepped to the right, just in time to watch the wooden piece crash with such force that the burgundy tiles covering the countertop cracked and the mirror above it shattered. The drawers and doors flew open, the wood splintering, towels and sheets flew off the shelves. Eleanor stared at the fallen armoire for a second. Still hearing her house torquing and cracking, she ran from the bathroom, fearing she'd not make it outside before the roof collapsed. She wondered if this was the big one. Was this the one in which the world as she knew it would disappear? She began descending the stairs to utter quiet. However, when she reached the landing, the house began to groan and move again. At the landing, her favorite piece of artwork rested on a heavy marble pedestal. It was called In the Evening, and it was a green patinaed bronze of an elegantly draped female figure. She and Ron had bought the sculpture 7 years earlier when they felt flush and romantic on their honeymoon, a time when all, including having a baby together, seemed possible. Now, and the bronze atop it swayed at the instant she ran past. The heavy sculpture slid off its base, hitting her hard in the knee, opening a very nasty gash. When she reached the bottom of the stairway, blood flowing down her leg at the side of the first floor, the massive wood beam that supported the front entry of the house had collapsed, dragging the plaster down with it. She stood still for a second, a fraction of a second, absorbing the sight of the entryway, now open to the sky. Then another huge aftershock hit. With this jolt, seemingly bigger than the previous one, the old upright piano that rested against the wall of the living room began to roll along the hardwood floor. As she watched it, it crashed through the glass picture window, the one facing north, its views all the way to San Francisco. The piano dropped to the lawn with a thud, its string reverberating crazily. She ran toward the back door to avoid the ruined living room with its smashed picture window and open ceiling, and on her way down to the kitchen, she caught a split-second sight of her son Max's room. Everything there was on the floor as well, drawers tipped out, bookshelves emptied. She had, as she saw, the precious model airplane collection that he had made as a young boy crushed onto the ground, pieces of the unpainted metallic wood glinting in the debris. Those airplanes represented hours of Max's childhood when he'd built every model of every airplane that they had at the hobby store. I'll skip to the last section that I'm going to read today. In the first 2 years of their marriage, she'd had 2 miscarriages, one after the other. They had been painful, and she'd grieved. After both, it seemed that everyone she knew or passed down the street was pregnant. When Ron's sister, who she loved, had a baby the same day Eleanor was lying in bed recovering from her second miscarriage, she could barely muster congratulations. She blamed herself for the second miscarriage. Perhaps she had tried to get pregnant too soon after the first miscarriage. Perhaps she'd been working too hard. She was ambitious. She took on many committee assignments at the university where she worked. But after the miscarriages, there was a complete failure to conceive. Finally, Dr. Baden, her fertility doctor, said that he had little to have a baby without complicated interventions. He determined that she was already approaching menopause. At 41, this was young, but early menopause ran in Eleanor's family. Think of it like a fruit stand, Dr. Baden said when she was trying to conceive. In the morning, the apples and the pears are put out. They're displayed in rows, each fruit shiny and juicy. But by the end of the day, when the fruit seller is ready to close up shop, there are only a few pieces remaining. The ones that are left are a bit bruised and shriveled. That's the way your eggs are. There aren't many remaining, and those few aren't particularly viable. What a depressing image, thought Eleanor, her eggs all shriveled and non-viable. That day they left Dr. Baden's office, and Ron had put his arm around her and said gently, it was okay. He loved his stepchildren, Max and Lara, and he didn't want her to undergo the radical treatments, surgery, and massive amounts of hormones that getting pregnant would involve. He didn't think Eleanor could bear another miscarriage either. The odds were bad, and it wasn't worth it. He'd been in Max and Laura's lives since they were 7 and 10. Now they were 14 and 17. They were terrific kids, and he said they were enough. But Eleanor didn't believe him. Even before the earthquake, it grieved her that they hadn't had a baby together. Although she said yes to having more children at first because she wanted to marry Ron, she hadn't been completely sure at first, but she watched as Ron became a warm and a generous stepfather. He deserved to have a child. They deserved to have a child, a baby they could raise together. It was just like him to say it wasn't a loss, for he asked so little for himself. So.
Well, thank you, Elayne, and thank you for choosing to read that passage, which, so as you can tell, Elayne can write, and so I did have a couple of quick. You've already spoken a little bit about how much of this is autobiographical. Had you lived through an earthquake, and was that scene
the Loma
pretty much?
Prieta.
Yeah. It just felt. Actually, to be honest, the whole book had a wonderful feeling of reality to me. That I think if I were to say anything sort of in general about the book, it just felt true. On a human level. It didn't feel like a false note, and it didn't feel like there was a false note to me. So, and the earthquake scene certainly was part of that. I also was just curious about the that comment by that doctor about think of the fruit stand. Was there actually a doctor who said something like that? Oh,
No,
I'm glad. I mean, if there was, he or she should have been reported. But
Yeah, there was an implication that, there weren't too many eggs that were there.
okay. So, I guess one since you've talked a little bit about your experience of writing the book and also the first book and the rejections, can you share with us, Elayne, just how this came up in your life, the idea of becoming a published. Is it kind of a dream that you've had for years and years and years, or is this something that came to you fairly recently?
Well, thank you. That's a really pertinent question because I don't talk too much about it, but I had a passion for reading. I was a kid who never put a book down, and books are the greatest company for me. And so I loved reading. The concept of being a writer that I perceived was unacceptable to my family. That in those, at least in my Jewish community in Chicago, what girls did when they went off to university, despite, in addition to a husband, was nursing or teaching. Those were acceptable professions for a female. And I think if I had said to my parents, I want to be a writer, I'm going to learn about writing, I wouldn't have gotten a great response. Now, that's not to say that other women don't do it. I mean, obviously they do. There's women writers. But I was not courageous enough to make that statement. And so I went off to college, though, and I took a few creative writing I did become an occupational therapist. That was also in a book I took out of the library that said, Careers for Girls. That was actually the name of it. Careers for Girls. Not too many limitations there, right? So I became an occupational therapist, and I ended up getting a master's and a doctorate and teaching at San Jose State, teaching in the health sciences program. But their passion was still there, and it grew and it grew. Where it got ignited was at university. I took a creative writing class, and as we were walking out one day after submitting a short story, the teacher said, so what kind of a writer would you like to be? I said, oh, me, a writer. I'm an occupational therapy major, and there were many classes to take, and I didn't have time to take writing classes, but it was there. It was ignited. And then in my 40s, I got involved with the Stanford, I lived near Stanford. I got involved with the creative writing, the adult ed creative writing program at Stanford, which is great. And I had wonderful teachers, and I got just enough to hook me in. I mean, you could tell. I mean, I just was getting encouraged. And I began to think that I was going to do this. And so in my late 40s is when I really began to get serious. And I submitted like crazy, got a few short stories published, did some journalism. Did journalism overseas as well as in Northern California. I kept, getting my whistle wet and writing. What I knew is that I wanted to write long-form fiction. I wanted to write stories that go over a lot of time and many generations. That was my passion. But really didn't get serious about it till my late 40s.
And one of the things that I always think about, especially with a novel, especially with a first novel, is what an unbelievable investment of time and energy for something that you don't have any guarantee is going to get picked up. And even if it does get picked up, is it going to actually sell?
Exactly.
So, I mean, how, especially back then when you didn't have yet any success, how did you even think about the way that you were sort of gambling with your, with your time, those years of your life?
Right. It's like a twofold answer. One, there was nothing I liked doing more. I mean, I'm not athletic. My husband is off doing all these wonderful sports, and I'm a slug. I make myself go swimming. I make myself, but I don't love it at all. What I think the things that I'm really passionate about are my children, my husband, and writing. I care so much about it. I can spend hours agonizing over an A or a the until then I go back to the one that I had picked originally. But I got just enough encouragement that I was hooked. Writing residencies, and they were pretty prestigious places. And I would submit a story, and hundreds and hundreds, and into some of them thousands of people respond to these writing residencies. And I got some wonderful writing residencies. I got to go off to really beautiful places, but somehow it didn't ever lead to a book being published. And then we moved here. I don't know, maybe it has something to do with looking out the window in our beautiful San Ynez Valley and being fortunate enough to retire, first of all, and then being fortunate enough to have something I love doing. So it finally happened.
It's a great story. Wonderful. I'm also interested in your group of 10 friends, and when you would read to them, you did say that you weren't really looking for criticism or suggestions, but really more feedback. But did you actually tell them, I'm not really interested in your, your critiques, or did you invite the feedback and then have to sort of sift through now what do I want to incorporate, what do I want to reject as far as the received?
Right. I don't think I muffled them, but I did it more for their sake than mine. I didn't want them to feel compelled to be professional editors, because that isn't what he was really looking for. I mean, I knew that there would be editors that would look at it. So I didn't need them to be professional editors. I needed them to just react from their gut. I mean, the way we all do when we read a book. Are we bored? We all know when we're bored by a book. I mean, we just want to skip ahead. So I wanted to know that, and I would ask them. It wasn't just nonverbal, although that really counted, but I would afterwards say, where did the story pick up for you? And then when I would get a laugh or a sniff, I thought, okay, that's a good thing, because I guess ultimately what you want to do is you want to touch people emotionally. I mean, I don't bother to read books that don't touch me. So if I would get that from this group of friends who were pretty honest and pretty lovely, and sometimes they would say stuff that I'd have to filter out, because in the first book there's a scene where, I can't give it away, but she makes a decision about where to live as an older person in Love is a Rebellious Bird, and someone in the group started a whole argument about that wouldn't have been the place where she would have gone, and it was a whole argument, and I just didn't want us all to get hung up with that stuff, because those are just authorial choices, or something that a professional editor would tell me, no, that doesn't work. But I just wanted to get a feel, were people turning the pages? That's the main thing. Or are they just, not so invested? And I really was very lucky with this group. They are still wonderful friends. And, this is just a little sidelight I have to share. People here in Santa Barbara and up in San Ynez Valley have no idea what a thrill this is for me, because, oh, you wrote a book, that's nice. Everyone writes a book. But my friends that I lived through all of this with in Northern California, this gang of very dear, dear friends, they know how many rejections, and they know what this means. So I sometimes feel it's sort of part of the toughness of moving when you're older is that people don't know the history.
Thank you. I want to shift now to the topic of adoption. I was so interested to see how many people raised their hands and realized that that was a big part of why a lot of people have come tonight. I was talking with Michelle before the program, and she was saying that you have a friend who is an adoptive parent, right? And that she was thinking of recommending the book to. And I said, well, it's not all warm and fuzzy. and she said, that's right, it's not all warm and fuzzy. I guess, without getting into the plot of the book or anything, I really want to ask you very personally, Elayne, if somebody were asking you, is adoption a good idea? How do you respond to that?
First, I cringe, because I don't know what to do with that question. 30% of kids in therapeutic schools, where my son actually ended up going, 30% of that population are adopted. In almost any study of children with difficulties, there's a preponderance of adoptive kids, and that's tough. On the other hand, if a woman has been told that her eggs are like at those at a fruit stand, and there's no chance she's going to have a baby, and I want to get into this if we have time from the Bible, we know what infertility does. I mean, look at the biblical women who have been agonized over not being able to have a child. I don't know if it's the same for men. I mean, I've been interested to hear from men if not being able to have a child is as painful, but I know that for many, many women, not being able to have a baby is devastating. And so how do I say to a woman like that, maybe she's lost a baby, maybe she's miscarried, maybe she couldn't conceive. I don't know. I mean, I can't do it. I mean, and it's different. There are some adoptions that are beautiful, and that, there's no looking back. I have had a rough time, and I have been involved in a lot of programs where I heard a lot of adoption stories, and where I've been in lots of support groups. So I'm certainly aware, but I want to encourage any of you who are interested in the question. There's this fabulous New Yorker article about adult adoptees. It's the best thing I've read, and it came out after I published the book, after the book was being published. It's in the April 23 New Yorker, and it's called The Fog of Adoption. And it's outstanding, and she interviews 4 adult adoptees. And not that they're non-functional, some of them are fine, but she really addresses the pain of an adult adoptee at various points in their life, and it's a cross-section, interracial, interreligious. There are lots and lots of stories, but it's a good reference article.
So the New Yorker,
April 10th, 2023, and it's called The Fog, and it's by Melissa Farquhar. She's a pretty important New Yorker writer. But I don't know the answer to that question. I just try to gather facts, try to know what you're doing. And I think this is more of a recent thought, because I think people have sugar-coated adoption. And you'll excuse me for being political, I can't help it. I am very upset with our Supreme Court Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, because her idea is that we don't need abortion. Why would we have to have abortion? Because adoption is so wonderful. So I think the simplicity of that remark gets me down. It's not a simple thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I just don't. It's a hard answer.
Yeah. No, I get that, and I think that honestly, it's one of the things that struck me as courageous about writing this book is knowing that so many people who are reading it are going to be reading it in the light of their own lives, and that you're sort of touching some very tender parts of people's lives.
I don't know if we'll have time today, and I don't know if there's willingness, but I have to tell you, with my first book, when I would do groups, we talk about the book, we talk about relationships, we talk about power. This book, when I've had groups, it becomes like a therapy session. And I feel like I should travel with a therapist, because I don't necessarily know the best way to handle it. But people do share very personal, very gut-wrenching stories, and I bet there's some right here.
Yeah, and it is what makes it such a wonderful book, is that it does feel so true. One of the where do I want to go with this? What about research and sort of investigation that you did as part of your preparation for writing this book? Was that, or did you just really need to go to your own personal experience? Did you go out and try to learn more about other people's experiences?
Yeah, a little of both. I don't know if I did a tremendous amount of research because I had been in so many adoption groups. Both prior to making the decision to adopt, there was a support group in Oakland that I went to, and then all of the programs that my own son was in had parent support groups. So I heard lots and lots of stories, and I did some research. But some of this is really cutting edge, because this whole notion, there's 2 notions that are very cutting edge. One is this idea of inherited trauma. And so, David, do you remember the word that Linda taught us? I have it here, I think. It's this idea that we get things from generations past, even if they're not in the DNA. There's a change that happens in the cell wall that, you know the word? Thank you. Here's a smart lady, epigenetics. I was blocking that out. The whole research on epigenetics, which is pretty new, and I have doctor friends that are telling me it's really beginning to show up in the literature. This whole idea of epigenetics and what happens back that change the cell structure, but not the DNA, not, not identifiable characteristics new. And then the whole idea of the loss happen as the child is born and taken away from the birth mother. So the notion of the smells, the sounds, the things that happened in utero, because people say to me, well, you had your baby when he was days old. But there is still research that is growing about the fact of the child living in the womb of someone.
Interesting. So, should we open it for questions?
Absolutely.
Or? Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, I don't want to go too late tonight.
Which time is it
it's
now?
10 to 8 now.
Okay.
So, let's say another 10 to 15 minutes at most, okay?
Perfect.
Yeah. Renee? Renee?
My daughter is adopting a child. I mean, it's faster to adopt, but she got him when he was 3 months old. What? Oh, okay. My daughter is adopting a kid. She had him since he was 3 months old. What is your view on open adoption versus adoption that is not open, where the kid gets to see the parents and family and
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I mean, I have a question for you. Are you going to let your daughter read this book? Because I had a discussion with that in a book group, because a woman very similarly said her daughter was adopting, and people said, you can have her read it. And she said, I don't know. But, we, again, I don't want to be discouraging to anyone who wants to make a family. I don't know the answer to that question. I think everyone has a total right to know who their birth parents were. And I found that, that's consensus now, is they're not like the old Catholic social services and Jewish family service was where they used to seal the records. They just aren't doing that anymore. I don't know exactly how it's changed, but everyone feels that everyone has a right. And besides that, with DNA testing and 23andMe, people are finding out all this stuff. So it's pretty hard to keep secrets.
So I see Michelle and then Nina. Okay.
So I'm wondering about maybe decades ago when people didn't tell the child that they adopted that they were adopted. Is there a lot of psychological research that has gone on about that particular issue? Because somebody might wonder, why do I feel so different? They might feel like, oh, this is my family.
And thank you, Michelle. That's true in both. Both are true, and both seem to be true. I have told me that they were adopted and they had absolutely no interest. They found out they were adopted and they said, I already know my parents. I don't need to search. And then there's other people who are very traumatized by that, and are traumatized by not having the facts. So I tend to believe that we're all better when we know who we are as much as we can, but there are examples, just as you said, of people who just are fine. Like, why would I search for anybody else? I have a happy life.
Thank you. Nina.
Thank you. Renee, we can talk about open adoption. I'll give you lots of perspective. So I'm curious, in addition to being captured by the story, and what were you hoping people would come away with? What takeaways were you aiming for?
Thank you. First of all, I'm a fiction writer. This isn't a memoir, and it's not a how-to. I'm so, I'm so humbled. I don't want to tell anyone what to do. So I don't have a message. And this happened with my first book, Love is a Rebellious Bird, because people said, oh, why did she choose that guy? And oh, she made me so mad. And, you know, ultimately, as a fiction writer, what I'm trying for is a good story. And if I succeed in that, if I've given you a good story and expanded your world a little bit, we read to be expanded, then that's good. I did my job. I would also say that I have no message for adoption other than get educated. You know, look at what you can and try the best you can to learn as much as you can. But I just thought it was a story that needed, I didn't have a specific message.
Skana.
I haven't read this book yet. I read the other one. I'm wondering whether the characters in the book are Jewish, and also the tonight's event mentioned something about Jewish adoption. So can we talk about that?
Thanks, Skana. By the way, Skana was the person who, after my first book was published, told me that she found some typos in it. And I wanted to kill myself. No, because, you know, it's been edited a million times, but yeah, things creep in. Right. But you have a good eye, obviously. Yes, that's the first question. Thank you. Yes, they're definitely Jewish. There are events in the book from a bris to a bar mitzvah to sitting shiva to convert, I mean, everything. It's definitely through a Jewish eye because that's my eye. I definitely hope, and I know that Jewish readers are, I hope, you know, finding affirmation. Jewish life cycle events. That's probably the biggest thing, is there's Jewish life cycle events in it. The Jewish sensibility, I never know. I was shocked when it did so well with the National Jewish Book Award. I didn't set out to write a Jewish book, but I have a Jewish eye. I hope to learn from the rabbi about Jewish adoption, just because in the research I've done, and we talked a bit about this, that Christian religions that are proselytizing religions have a whole segment of people who are to save their baby from hell. And they adopt in order to perhaps increase the number of Christians in their particular sect. Now, that just wouldn't be part of why Jewish people adopt. I've touched by a couple of things the rabbi said in a Torah study group. You said, when Moses came down from the mountain the first time, the Jewish people were converted. Right? Is that right?
Yes, the traditional idea is that the entire Jewish people converted to Judaism at Mount Sinai.
Right, and I've heard the same thing is true of Muslims, that when we all trace our roots to this moment of inception of the religion, and I'm just curious about that, because an undertone, really good question, because an undertone to this book that I had an answer for is that this baby was converted to Judaism. He had a formal halakhic conversion. He went to the mikvah in San Francisco with a tribunal. I dunked him. You know, he had a circumcision by a moil. You know, my late husband was very serious that he should be considered Jewish. Well, maybe there's some thought about that.
Yeah, so
You have
I have I did a little research also in preparation for tonight, because this isn't areas of expertise. You can all do similar research, although I guess I know a little bit more about the context of the teachings. In two different places in the Talmud, a statement is made. So it's the same statement that appears in two different places in the Talmud, and I'll read it just to get it right. one who raises an orphan in his or her home is considered as though he or she gives birth to that orphan. So that appears twice. Interestingly, one of the proof texts, or one of the stories that is cited as an example of that, is, who would you say is a famous adoptee in the Torah? Moses. Exactly. Moses is an adopted child. And the Talmud, and in one of those two places in the Talmud, the rabbi in the Talmud is saying that the daughter of, that Pharaoh's daughter, Bitya, is where we know her name, that it's clear from the Torah text that she adopts Moses, but it's saying that it's as though she gave birth to him because she adopted him. So that's, and the fact that it appears in two different places in the Talmud makes it, I guess it doesn't make it more true, but it just means that it's more part of sort of the Jewish collective understanding. That's right. And I will say that Rabbi Jacob Emden, who I know a very little about, but he lived in the 17th century, or early 18th century in Germany. He says, this does not only apply to an orphan, but is true even if the child has biological parents, yet another brings him up for the sake of a mitzvah. It is considered as though he gives birth to him, literally. So that's the statement of, a very, very well-known, respected 18th century rabbi. So that's saying a lot. On the other hand, the other thing that I found with just research is that the halakha, Jewish law, takes the position that when a child is adopted, the relationship with the biological parent is not severed. Not severed. That they are regarded as always also the child of their biological parent. That was very interesting to me. That is why, according to halakha, a baby who's even adopted, on day one of their life, is required to go through conversion. The fact that the adoptive mother and father arrive in the hospital on that day and receive that baby immediately that's not enough to make them Jewish. They have that relationship with their biological parent never severed. So that was quite interesting to me. But as you can see, these two ideas are in tension with each other. If it's as though the adoptive parent has given birth to them, you would think that would mean that the biological parent is no longer part of that child's, past or life. So anyway, those were a few things. Elayne, you said you had a few questions for me. I don't know if those sort of initial comments address what your questions were or touch on them. Certainly, where things get how should I say, important, or the kinds of important questions that come up in a religious Jewish context do have to do with conversion and how, what is required in order for this child to be considered Jewish. And what you described,
Yeah.
of the, and I as a rabbi, if somebody were to ask me, I'm adopting a child on, immediately after they're born. Do they have to go through conversion? I don't like to respond to hypothetical situations in general. I think that's a bad idea in general, but I'm pretty sure that if I was presented with that question, I would say you should have them go through a conversion, and as traditional a conversion as possible, so that in their future, if they grow up and want to be a conservative Jew, an Orthodox Jew, they will have as much authenticity as possible, to bring to the table. So that would be my response, I think, to that situation. Sandra? Well, it's a great question. And what I would say, now I'm just going to answer coming from the different movements. What would Orthodox Judaism say? What would conservative? What would Reform? Basically, the Reform would say that a bar mitzvah, a life cycle event like that, counts for a lot in terms of establishing that young person's. Is it sufficient? Is it enough? That's maybe a question. From the standpoint of conservative or Orthodox Judaism, unless and until that young person goes through a traditional Jewish conversion, they are not Jewish yet. So that would be the response of a more traditional rabbi or a more traditional Jewish authority. Okay. Susan. Here, let me bring the mic.
As usual, I have a whole bunch of things to say, but it would take too long. But one of the things about the conversion ceremony, I think we went to the same mikvah you probably did in San Francisco.
Yes.
And one thing that was really nice is, I think it's an Orthodox group, and the woman said that once you go through the mikvah to the child, it's like one thing. But our rabbi, who was conservative at the time, said that my daughter could have, he was there for the conversion, and then he said there was something either in the paperwork for that or just in his instruction, and said when she's 13 and ready for bat mitzvah, it's up to her to choose if she still wants to be Jewish. And we all know what happened with that.
Yeah, that's a great point, because the willingness, here we're taking a baby into a mikvah, the baby has no say,
Right.
But what you're adding, I think, is really important.
Yeah, did everybody follow that? I saw that also, in my research about, well, what would be the position of conservative Judaism? And it's that if a person is converted as an infant, they are converted, but when they get to the age of maturity, they're basically asked, are you willingly accept taking this on? So, thank you, Susan. It's now 8:10. Unless anybody else has any pressing questions, or Elayne, do you have any final? The books are for sale, and Elayne is happy to sign. But go ahead.
No, I mean, I would love to share my son's Jewish identity with you at some point, because he has a very strong Jewish identity. And thank you so much for coming out, and you have been wonderful.
Thank you, Elayne. And congratulations on another published book, and And we hope that the third one will get published also. Great, wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody.